I woke up thinking I was going to have a normal day. I put on my old boots, which look more like war relics, and went out onto the balcony to have a sip of coffee while looking at my chickens parading in the field, as if they were models in a rural fashion show. It was my peace, my little corner, my refuge away from the bullshit of the city. But then she came, with that gait that seemed to make the sidewalk bow. Her blonde hair was a mess, her makeup was so thick you could see it from the doorway, and her sunglasses were so big it looked like she had two TVs on her face. She was the new resident of the Residents Association, who had moved in a few kilometers away, one of those who buys a house in the bush and thinks the whole world has become a gated community. The woman stopped a giant car at the entrance to my farm, an SUV that looked like a battle tank with chrome wheels. She opened the door, looking like she was going to solve the country's problems, and got out holding a clipboard like a sword. I swear, I didn't even have time to finish my coffee. She was already marching down the gravel driveway with the haste of someone who has an apocalypse to manage. No excuse me, no good morning, no, hello, your name is… nothing. She just spread her arms and shouted, as if she were talking to an invisible army. Park here, darling. It's easy to fit 60 cars. I froze. Was she talking to me? Was it a prank? You know that moment when your brain tries to keep up with the audacity of the situation, but it crashes like dial-up internet? The worst thing was what came next. She started giving orders to the employees of an events company that I didn't even know existed around here. Tents being set up, traffic cones positioned, arrow signs indicating VIP parking in my yard, where my chickens hold their union meeting every day at noon, where I chop wood, where I harvest corn, where my mother has been ironing clothes for 30 years. She thought she could just come along and turn my piece of land into a rural shopping center. I stared at it with my mouth half open, like someone watching a UFO land on a barbecue. And then, of course, I asked what was going on, right? Because as far as I knew, I hadn't rented anything, signed anything, authorized anything. Excuse me, this is private property. And she, with the naturalness of someone offering a glass of water, turned to me with a plastic smile and said, "Relax, you can help us maneuver the cars. It'll be quick." My blood boiled in a way that only someone who has been called an employee in their own home can understand. What did she think I was? The valet at her event? The valet for the big party she decided to throw without even knocking on my door? Worse, she began to ignore my presence. She spoke to her guests as if I were part of the decoration, a scarecrow with a CPF. I swear I saw one of the waiters asking where the restroom was and her pointing to my balcony, as if I had installed a rural self-service totem. And there, in the midst of all that tomfoolery, I realized this woman was not only invading my property, she was invading my sanity. More cars arrived. Well-dressed people, heels stuck in the mud, fake country socialite giggles. They'd even laid out a makeshift red carpet with a truck tarpaulin. Someone opened the trunk with a stereo that sounded more like an electric trio. One of the guests took a selfie in front of my tractor. He called it themed decoration. I started laughing, not from happiness, the kind of laughter that comes when your brain goes haywire from all the anger you've built up. I wanted to get up on the roof and shout, "This isn't the Farmville, fuck you!" But I took a breath. I swallowed my pride with the last sip of coffee, which was already cold, and I went back into the house with my heart beating like a samba school drum. I needed to think, plan, prepare the counterattack, because one thing I learned from my grandfather: when someone steps into your yard uninvited, you can let them in, but it's up to you to decide when to leave. And it was there, looking out the kitchen window, watching her point at my chicken coop as if it were a liquor store, that I decided this woman was going to regret having thought she could turn my farm into a VIP parking lot for a fifth-rate reality TV show. She had messed with the wrong farmer. The next morning, the piece of my property had been replaced by an emotional crater. The lawn, the one I always looked after with more care than many people out there, was dented by dozens of tires from SUVs and pickup trucks that looked more like battle tanks. There was a mixture of mud, heel marks, cigarette butts, and even a plastic cup floating in my cistern. The smell was of cheap beer, expensive perfume, and desperation. And it was only Monday. The woman wasn't satisfied with turning me into an employee of her own yard. And now she was pretending that this was absolutely normal, that the world revolved around her idea of a community event, and that any kind of land that breathed clean air belonged, in some mystical way, to the Residents' Association that she presided over with an iron fist and sparkling nail polish. The most infuriating thing was that nobody seemed to be bothered. None of the guests bothered to ask whose property it was. It was as if everything had been bought, rented, negotiated, but it wasn't. They were so drunk on sparkling wine and self-importance that they didn't even notice that they were standing where, days before, a clutch of chicks had run under a bucket. Now, that same spot was used as a makeshift parking lot for a Jeep with a car stereo that made the ground vibrate. She showed up again in the afternoon, all made up, in heels, with that white blazer that screamed, "I'm the queen of the world." She was talking on the phone, walking around my field with the ease of someone showing a property for sale. As she pointed at things, she laughed and said phrases like, "You can still fit another 3 cars in here if you push it a bit." The audacity knew no bounds. I decided to leave the house, with the face of a few friends and a bucket of corn in my hand, the only way to keep my chickens away from the chaos. And even then, they looked around with the typical expression of someone thinking, "What kind of mess is this?" While I was spreading the corn on the ground, I noticed that she gave me a quick glance, like someone who recognizes an extra in a soap opera who has appeared in an important chapter. "Ah, great that you're there. The guys are coming back on Saturday to pick up some things left over from the party. Just leave the gate open, please." Yes, that's exactly what she said. As if I were the janitor of her country house. As if I should silently accept the parade of arrogance parading over my sweat, my grass, and my patience. And that's when something inside me snapped. It wasn't an outburst. It was an awakening. You know when you realize that there's no point in arguing with someone who thinks they live in a reality show where the rest of the world is there just to make up the volume? That was it. Trying to talk to her would be like trying to teach quantum physics to a rock. The woman didn't live on the same plane of reality as me, and I was tired of being the only one trying to keep my composure while she turned my farm into the set for the redneck version of the Oscars. I spent the rest of the afternoon in silence. I walked around the chicken coop, cleaned the stable, washed the porch. I did everything I usually do when I need to think. The smell of the wet wood, the sound of the animals, the wind cutting through the field. It all reconnected me with something that this woman seemed to want to steal. My peace, my territory. In the evening, I cracked open a beer. I sat on the veranda. The sky was clear, full of stars, and it was looking at that immensity that I understood. She needed a lesson, one of those that can't be taught by shouting or suing. It was a practical lesson, with a taste of revenge and a smell of chicken poop. I didn't want violence. I'm not like that, but I wanted to show that people like her don't walk over others with impunity. So I started planning. I spent the whole night awake, scribbling in an old notebook, moving around with my little flashlight, observing the parts of the farm she used most, the paths the cars took, where she felt most comfortable parading her arrogance. It had to be there. Near the chicken coop was an old structure made of sturdy wood. We used it to store hay, old tools, my grandfather's junk. It had a padlock. It had ventilation. It had everything I needed. The stage was almost ready, but first, I needed a push, and it came from the most unlikely place, one of the employees of that events company. The guy showed up 2 days later, looking for a speaker they'd forgotten. He said that everything was a mess, that no one knew what belonged to whom, and that woman was just in charge, and disappeared. He said, without knowing who he was talking to, that she treated everyone like dirt, and that her name was on the contract, yes, but it was all kind of under the radar. That sealed it. The missing piece fell into place. She was more than a slacker. She was a professional profiteer, and she thought she was invincible. Well, on Saturday, when she came back with her "I just came to pick up a few things" speech, the gate was open. The cars started coming in again, as if Saturday had been set aside for another spree. But this time, I was waiting. She got out of the car, alone. No staff, no audience, no drones flying overhead. And she walked straight to the chicken coop. Maybe she wanted to see if the cutlery from the party had been stored there. Maybe she was just feeling comfortable. But what she didn't know was that today, that door only opened from the outside. When the latch closed and the padlock clicked, I felt a peace I hadn't felt since the previous Sunday. And it wasn't just peace, it was justice. It was the universe saying, now things are in place. While she banged on the wood inside, spouting words that didn't go with her tailure, I climbed into the car with my suitcase ready. I left the note taped to the gate. I've gone on a trip. I'll be back when the dust settles. Or not. Cancún was waiting for me. And she was going to have enough time to reflect amidst the smell of chicken, dried feces, and the sound of an out-of-tune rooster crowing every 10 minutes with no idea of time zones. That was just the beginning. And honestly, it was already beautiful. On the plane, on the way to paradise, I looked out of the window and laughed by myself. It wasn't the laughter of someone who had won. It was the laughter of someone who had finally turned the key. That moment, when the world stops being civilized because you've had enough of being civilized on your own. She had the audacity to invade my land, treat me like part of the furniture, and still thought she was going to come out on top. But now, she was locked in the henhouse, surrounded by feathers, feces, and roosters, with an identity crisis. While the stewardess passed by with juices and trained smiles, I was tasting my revenge, with the taste of lemon on the rocks. I wasn't sure how long I could stay away without someone coming up to me with, "Oh, so-and-so called the police," or "She called the fire brigade because there's no Wi-Fi inside." But I needed it. A few days of detox, a swim in the sea, a caipirinha, and zero contact with anyone who wore heels to trample on other people's dignity. I arrived in Cancun with a light heart, light like those hotel towels that are thin but smell good. I disembarked, took a cab with a driver who only spoke Spanish and smiled when I said, "I want to forget everything." He understood. He dropped me off at a hotel facing the sea that was prettier than any Instagram filter. I felt like I was right there. Me, the ocean, and the sound of the waves erasing any echo of that woman screaming from the other side of the chicken coop. The first 2 days were a dream. I woke up late, had coffee in front of the sea, slept in a hammock, ate shrimp as if cholesterol were a detail. My cell phone? I forgot it in the safe. To hell with the world. If anyone was desperate, they should talk to the scarecrow. He understood the pain of the earth better than someone who said community just to justify abuse. But on the third day, a notification flashed up on my cell phone screen. It was a message from Raul, my neighbor from the nearest farm. A man with a slurred speech and very short patience. "Dude, what did you do to that woman? She's been stuck in the chicken coop since Saturday. She tried to bribe me yesterday with a designer watch and a black card to call the police. She said she'd lost the key. Are you all right?" The laugh that escaped me made a lady in the hotel restaurant look at me with a frown. I shrugged. I was fine. But his question reminded me of something. I had planted an emotional time bomb on my own doorstep. Because, of course, the world doesn't understand nuance. It only sees the end of the story. Man locks woman in henhouse sounds terrible until you hear, because she turned his farm into a parking lot and called him a valet. I answered calmly. I said that everything was under control, that it was just a peaceful protest with the smell of manure. I asked him to leave her there for another day and that I'd be back soon. He replied with a laughing audio. Raoul was the kind of man who respects territory and knows that certain absurdities deserve a proportionate response. The next morning, I received a video. The recording was shaky, made by someone hiding behind a tree, and showed her trying to negotiate with one of my chickens. Yes, the creature was talking to Penelope, my oldest chicken, trying to convince her to find an alternative way out. That was the pinnacle, the point of no return. The woman was dirty, her makeup was smeared, her hair was mussed up, and she looked like she'd been attacked by a possessed hairdryer. Her voice no longer had the firmness of someone in charge. It was shaky, mixed with desperation and dehydrated arrogance. You could see that she wasn't used to silence, to isolation, to the real sound of nature, which doesn't obey commands or association rules. There she was facing the worst kind of punishment, not being heard, not being obeyed, not having a stage. And all this surrounded by chickens that shit without ceremony, peck without warning, and don't take selfies with anyone. Meanwhile, I was diving in transparent waters, being served by smiling waiters, being treated like a human being. That was the kind of contrast that makes you think, how many times do we let ourselves be swallowed up by clueless people just to keep the peace? How many times do you accept being ground down so that someone else can parade on top? On that beach, lying on the sun lounger with the breeze lulling me, I understood that it wasn't just about her. It was about everything she represented. That mentality of thinking that the world revolves around the wishes of those who speak louder, those who sign paper in gold ink, those who threaten with smiles. It was about setting limits, even if that limit is a padlocked wooden door and the smell of sour corn. I spent the afternoon in silence, watching the horizon. The sea was a shade of blue that looked like a lie, and that was the truth. No matter how loud the chaos, peace always screams louder, even if it's inside your head. And mine was celebrating. At dinner in the evening, I raised a glass of cheap Mexican wine and made a toast by myself to the best-used chicken coop in history, and to the woman who finally discovered the value of silence without an audience. Deep down, maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe someone would call the police. Maybe she'd hire a lawyer with a Latin surname. But you know what? Maybe, for the first time in her life, she had learned something other than by threat or regulation. Or maybe not. Some people, even chickens, don't understand. Returning from the trip was like waking up from a pleasant dream and stepping onto a wet carpet. That kind of shock that reminds you that the real world doesn't wait for you to finish your rest to keep spinning. It spins, squeezes you, charges you interest, and even asks if you slept well. I arrived at the farm with a tanned body and a renewed soul. I got out of the car with a smile, thinking that the silence of the dirt road would be the prelude to a peaceful morning. But what I found was a small audience of onlookers, all gathered in front of my gate, as if they were waiting for the next episode of a rural soap opera starring a homeless socialite and a farmer with serious patience problems. Raoul spotted me first and came walking up with that way of his, half dragging, half debauched. "Boy, I thought you were never coming back." The woman was already trying to break into the henhouse through the vents. I laughed. I laughed out loud. One of those laughs that comes out a bit involuntary because the absurdity of the situation turns into comedy. But the truth is that my patience was thinner than rice paper. I wanted to resolve everything at once. No beating around the bush. No speeches. When I unlocked the padlock and opened the chicken coop door, she was there, sitting on a sack of feed, sweaty, disheveled, covered in straw, dried poop, and rancid. Her posture had changed. It was no longer that upright pose of someone who thinks she's the CEO of the neighborhood. Now, she was a heap of wounded vanity, with her ego tucked into a corner. She jumped up when she saw me. She came with everything, ready to unleash an opera of indignation. But I held up my hand. I wanted to hear just one thing. "First of all, tell me, was it worth it?" The woman froze. She took a deep breath. She looked around as if trying to understand what planet she had woken up on. For a second, I thought she was going to say something sensible, that she was going to admit her mistake, apologize, in short, do the minimum. But no, she simply fixed her hair with the dignity of someone who still believes that pose is worth more than shame, and replied, "You don't know who you're dealing with." Ah, that phrase, the classic, the national anthem of arrogance. I asked her to leave. I said I wouldn't call the police. I wouldn't charge her. I wouldn't report her to anyone, on one condition, that she got out of my sight, out of my perimeter, and out of my story. But, of course, she wouldn't be her if she didn't find one last gasp of drama. She threw her heels in her hands, climbed into the muddy car, and sped off like she was on a cinematic escape. The crowd of onlookers dispersed, but not before giving me astonished looks and one or two restrained smiles, like, "You're crazy, but you did what we always wanted to do." Over the next few days, everything returned to normal. The smell of the countryside, the animals, the real silence. I began to notice that my breathing had returned. I walked lighter. I was sleeping better. The countryside was healing, and so was I. But the story didn't die there. It began to spread, not by me, but by those who saw it, those who heard about it, those who had something stuck and saw in that situation a cry for relief. Soon, what was just a protest with chickens became a local legend. The day the farmer locked the HOA queen in the chicken coop. You could even print it on a mug. And what about her? Oh, she left. She moved out of state, according to Raul. They say she tried to sue. She tried to spread rumors. She tried to regain her pose. But it was no use. Because there are some things that even a lawyer can't save. A reputation damaged by public stupidity. Me? I carried on living. Crops up to date, happy chickens, the balcony back to being quiet. Every now and then, someone passes by and jokingly shouts, "Do you have a space in the VIP parking lot?" I just shake my head, smiling. Deep down, I know I've won something more valuable than a victory. I've won the silent respect of those who are tired of seeing absurdities and have never had the courage to react. I showed them that there is a limit, and that sometimes the right answer comes with feathers, a padlock, and a one-way ticket to Cancun. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.